The sun had not yet climbed above the mesas when the rider came through the dust. He moved without hurry, though the long shadow he cast stretched thin across the desert floor like something trying to escape him. The horse beneath him, a rangy bay with a scar across its haunch, carried its head low and steady, hooves thudding into dry earth that smelled faintly of alkali and forgotten rain. The man wore a hat darkened by sweat and years. His coat, once black, had turned a weathered brown, its shoulders bleached by sun and wind. A Spencer rifle rode in the scabbard along his saddle, polished from use rather than care. He had the posture of someone who had forgotten comfort long ago. Ahead of him, the town of Red Arroyo bled slowly into view, rising out of the heat haze like something that had grown from spite rather than settlement. A handful of clapboard buildings leaned toward one another as if sharing secrets. The false front saloon stood taller than the rest, its paint peeling in strips that fluttered whenever the desert wind remembered to breathe. The rider paused at the crest of a shallow ridge and looked down at it. He watched a moment too long, as if weighing memory against necessity. Then he nudged the bay forward. Red Arroyo smelled of horse manure, sour whiskey, and last night's violence. A broken wagon wheel leaned against the general store. A mongrel dog lay asleep in the shade of a hitching post, ribs visible beneath mangy fur. Somewhere inside the saloon, a piano plinked uncertain notes, the player either drunk or grieving or both. Two men sat outside the sheriff's office, boots up on a crate, tin badges pinned carelessly to suspenders. They stopped talking as the stranger rode past. One spat tobacco into the dust with careful aim. Another ghost ridden through, he muttered. The rider dismounted outside the livery stable. He tied his horse loosely, the way men do when they trust their animals more. Then the town. A stable boy, all elbows and suspicion, approached. "Feed and water," the rider said. His voice carried gravel and restraint. "2 bits." The boy replied. The rider nodded and handed him a coin without counting. He paused, resting a hand briefly against the horse's neck. The bay flicked an ear backward, then forward again. Accepting the silence between them, inside the saloon, the air hung thick with smoke and last night's grudges. A few men lingered at tables, nursing coffee or whiskey depending on which regret they preferred. The bartender polished a glass with a rag that had given up cleanliness months ago. The rider stepped in and removed his hat. No one greeted him. That suited him fine. He sat at the far end of the bar. "Coffee," he said. The bartender eyed him, noted the dust, the rifle, the absence of hurry. "You passing through?" The rider shrugged slightly. "Maybe." The coffee arrived black and burnt, but he drank it without complaint. A door slammed open behind him. Conversation thinned. 2 men entered first. Broad-shouldered, coats cut from expensive cloth that didn't belong in a town like Red Arroyo. Between them they dragged a woman by the arm. She stumbled once, caught herself, and refused to cry out. Her dark hair fell loose around her face, streaked with dirt and dried blood near the temple. Her dress had been torn and poorly mended with twine. Bare feet left faint prints in the dust, tracked across the saloon floor. Behind them walked Sheriff Dalton Crane. Crane's badge gleamed too brightly. He wore his authority like a tailored coat, snug and comfortable. His mustache curved in a way that suggested he trusted mirrors more than God. "Morning, gentlemen," Crane announced, removing his gloves finger by finger. "Town business." One of the seated men chuckled without humor. No one else spoke. The woman's eyes moved across the room, quick and sharp. They paused briefly on the rider at the bar. He did not turn. He lifted his coffee and drank. "She was caught stealing livestock," Crane said, gesturing lazily. 3 calves. Branded stock." "That ain't true," she said, voice hoarse but steady. Crane smiled as though she had complimented him. "Apaches. Been moving bold lately," he continued, addressing the room rather than her. "Town councils decided we'll be settling the matter by auction. Compensation for the rancher she wronged." Silence gathered like storm clouds. The bartender stopped polishing his glass. The rider set his cup down slowly. One of the deputies shoved the woman forward. She stumbled again but stayed upright, chin lifting despite the tremor in her shoulders. You can't sell a person. Someone muttered from a table near the back. Crane turned his head slightly. The man who spoke found sudden fascination in his boots. We ain't selling a person, Crane replied pleasantly. We're auctioning labor, legal arrangement, signed and witnessed. He tapped a folded paper in his breast pocket. The writer finally turned. His eyes were pale, almost gray, set deep in a face cut by wind and years. He studied the woman without expression. Her gaze met his, wary, defiant, exhausted. Something flickered behind his eyes. It passed quickly. Crane clapped his hands once. Let's step outside. Sun's up? Good day for commerce? They gathered. In front of the saloon. Word traveled fast in places where boredom weighed heavier than mercy. Ranch hands, gamblers, shopkeepers, and drifters formed a loose circle. The woman stood beside a wooden hitching rail, wrists bound with rope that had already burned red into her skin. The rider leaned against the saloon wall. Hat pulled low again, a wagon rolled forward carrying a small crate that served as a makeshift platform. Crane climbed atop it with theatrical ease. Gentlemen, he called, and ladies were present. This here is Taya, apprehended under charge of livestock theft and trespass upon private grazing land. As the law allows, she is subject to indentured labor to repay damages and court costs. Taya closed her eyes briefly at the sound of her name spoken by a stranger. Opening bid, Crane said, starts at $20. Laughter rippled from somewhere in the crowd. 20? A ranch hand scoffed. I paid more for a saddle blanket. Then perhaps you'll open at 30, Crane suggested smoothly. 30, the ranch hand said after a pause, shrugging as if buying a mule he didn't need. 30 I have. Do I hear 40? 40, came another voice, the rider's. Jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Taya stared at the ground, toes curling into dust. 50, someone called. 60. 65. Each number landed like a hammer blow without sound. Crane grinned broadly, enjoying the rhythm. 80, said a tall cattle broker with silver cufflinks that flashed in the sun. The rider pushed himself off the wall. He stepped forward, boots stirring fine dust that hung in the air between breaths. 90, he said. Heads turned. Crane's smile faltered just slightly. He squinted, studying the stranger more carefully. Well now, he said, new voice. Do I hear 100? The crowd waited. The rider removed a worn leather pouch from inside his coat. He loosened the drawstring, then looked up. 150. A murmur spread outward like heat off iron. The cattle broker hesitated. His eyes flicked to Crane, seeking guidance. Crane gave a faint shake of his head. Sold, Crane announced after a deliberate pause. To the gentleman whose name I believe. We don't yet know. The rider climbed the crate steps without looking at anyone. He placed the pouch in Crane's gloved hand. The coins inside clinked with finality. Your name? Crane asked quietly. Elias Mercer. Crane's eyes narrowed, searching memory or suspicion or both. Pleasure doing business. Mr. Mercer, he said. Elias did not answer. He stepped down and approached Taya. He took a knife from his belt and cut the rope around her wrists. The fibers fell away. She flinched but did not step back. Can you walk? He asked. She nodded once. Then come. They left town beneath a sky bleaching toward noon. Elias led the bay horse while Taya walked beside him, keeping half a pace behind. As if uncertain of the rules of her new captivity, for nearly a mile they said nothing. The land stretched flat and merciless, dotted with mesquite and dry riverbeds that remembered water only in dreams. Finally, she spoke. You bought me to work? His eyes stayed ahead. No, she waited. Then why? He considered the question as though it weighed more than distance. Because they shouldn't have sold you. She studied him, suspicion tightening her mouth. That don't make me free. She said, no, he admitted, not yet. Wind pushed dust across their boots. The horse snorted softly. Where are you taking me? She asked. My ranch. She stopped walking. I won't be a prisoner again. He turned back toward her, expression unreadable. You won't? How I know? He reached into his coat slowly, deliberately, and withdrew the folded paper Crane had carried. He held it out. She hesitated, then took it. The document declared her indentured under Elias Mercer for repayment of debt. He struck a match against his boot heel and held the flame beneath the corner of the paper. Fire crawled upward, curling ink and signature alike. He dropped the burning sheet into the dust and crushed it beneath his heel. "There," he said. She stared at the smoldering ash. "Why?" She whispered again. Elias mounted the bay horse and extended a hand down to her. "Because someone once should have done it for me," he said. After a long moment, she accepted his hand. They rode until sunset bled copper across the desert. The ranch appeared slowly, unfolding across a valley where dry grass shimmered beneath the evening light. Fences stretched farther than sight. Windmills turned lazily, creaking like old bones. Cattle dotted the landscape in dark, drifting clusters. Taya's posture stiffened as recognition dawned. "This yours?" He nodded. The main house stood on a low rise, whitewashed but weathered, its porch wide and shadowed. Barns and bunkhouses spread outward like spokes from a wheel. Lanterns flickered to life as ranch hands noticed their approach. Several men gathered near the corral gate. Their expressions shifted from casual curiosity to surprise as Elias dismounted and helped Taya down. "This here is Taya," he said simply. "She's a guest. She eats same as anyone, works if she wants. Leaves if she wants." A few exchanged glances but nodded. Elias Mercer was not a man whose instructions invited debate. Inside the house, Taya stood uncertainly near the doorway. The air smelled of coffee, leather, and cedar smoke. She touched the brim of her sleeve. Noticing it had stopped trembling, Elias set his hat on a peg. "There's a wash basin out back," he said. "Cook'll fix you supper. You trust me in your house?" she asked. He paused at the table, fingers resting on its scarred surface. "I trust that you've been given no reason to trust anyone," he replied. "That's different." She watched him a long moment. "What happened to you?" she asked. Quietly got his shoulders stiffened. "Long time ago," he said. "Different town." He moved toward the door again. Conversation finished. Behind him, she whispered something in Apache, soft as breath. He did not understand the words, but he felt their weight settle into the room like dust that would not easily leave. Night fell, heavy over the ranch, carrying coyotes' distant songs and the slow rhythm of cattle shifting in sleep. Elias sat alone on the porch, cleaning his rifle with methodical precision. Lantern light carved deep shadows across his face. From inside the house, he heard Tia's quiet footsteps, hesitant but steady. She stepped onto the porch, hair washed and braided loosely down her back. She held a tin cup of coffee, cradling it as if warmth might escape if she loosened her grip. "You run all this land," she said. Double quote. "People know you bought Apache woman today, they will. That caused trouble." He slid the rifle bolt back into place. "Troubles? Been following me longer than you have." She studied him, reading lines carved by grief he refused to name. "My brother," she said suddenly, "he died when soldiers came through our valley. I tried to trade horses to get medicine. Ranchers' men said I stole cattle." "Why, Sheriff?" "Had me?" Elias nodded slowly, absorbing the fragments. "You believe me?" she asked. "Yes." He set the rifle aside and looked out across the dark fields. "Because you didn't ask me to," he said. They sat in silence, two figures outlined by lantern glow and the vast indifferent night dot far beyond the valley. Thunder rolled faintly. Though the sky remained clear, 3 days passed before Sheriff Dalton Crane rode through the ranch gate with 6 armed men at his back. Dust followed them like accusation. Elias stood in the corral mending a fence when they arrived. He finished tying the final knot before turning. Crane dismounted slowly, surveying the spread with poorly disguised admiration. "Hell of a place you got, Mercer," he said. Elias nodded. "Reckon I forgot to mention." Crane continued, strolling closer. Town councils reconsidered that auction. Taya emerged from the barn doorway, pausing when she saw them. Crane's smile widened. "Turns out," he said lightly, "papers weren't properly filed. Which means technically that girl's still property of Red Arroyo jurisdiction." Wind stirred the tall grass. Ranch hands drifted closer, tension coiling between their shoulders. Elias stepped forward, boots crunching gravel. "She ain't property of anyone," he said. Crane sighed as if disappointed by stubbornness. "Law don't see it that way." Elias's gaze moved across the armed men, measuring distance, timing, consequence. Behind him, Taya stood very still. The valley seemed to hold its breath, and far away, thunder rolled again, closer now, promising a storm that had been building long before any of them were born.